Well, I love my job because I get to come down to the bog in Victoria Street and meet one of the best guys from Ireland. He's the global brand ambassador for Teelings, Mr. Martin Lynch. Welcome aboard.
Very nice to meet you, Nick.
Great
Good to be here.
Well, you're going around the world telling everybody about fantastic Teelings Whiskey, and we've got some of your wonderful brand in front of us, and this one here is the single grain one. Tell us about that.
So this is our single grain whiskey. Like single malt, which is quite a well-known style, this is from a single distillery, and it's instead of malted barley, it's made with malted corn, malted maize, and it's aged exclusively in California red wine barrels, which gives it a lovely sweet kind of red berries flavour. It's a delicious whiskey. We call it our breakfast whiskey. It's quite easy to start with the single grain whiskey.
Yeah, you are starting breakfast with a whiskey. That's a great idea. What I didn't realise about whiskey was that the colourings that we're so used to actually come from the barrels, and when you see that that's distilled in a wine barrel, the next one here, which is our ground level whiskey for Teelings, is distilled in first a bourbon barrel and then finished off in a rum barrel to give its unique characteristics and colouring.
Exactly. All whiskey is clear when it comes off the still, and it's the oak casks, and a lot of the time what was used in the oak cask previously that gives it the flavour and it gives it more depth when it's matured. So this is our signature blend. It's, as you said, it's aged in bourbon barrels and finished for the last 6 months in South American rum cask, which gives it a lovely sweet raisiny delicious flavour.
Ooh, I'm looking forward to that. We're trying some of these wonderful whiskies down here at the bog, which you can get them at, but you can purchase them next door at Whiskey Galore. And when we are talking about purchasing something as beautiful as this, it's a 21-year-old. Tell us more about this one. It's fantastic.
So this is our 21-year-old single malt whiskey. Recently just won Best Irish Single Malt in the World at the World Whiskey Awards back in March in London. This whiskey is aged for 20 years in bourbon barrels, and for the last 14 months it's finished in Sauterne wine casks. It's a very long-lasting flavour. There's layers of complexity in there. A very mellow, toffee, beautiful whiskey. All our whiskies are 46% and they're non-chill filtered, so when we don't chill filter them, we leave in the fatty acids and the esters which contain the flavour and the character.
That is a very, very good whiskey. One thing I didn't know about whiskey, and the difference between Scottish and Irish whiskey is that there's whiskey is spelt, if it's from Ireland, W-H-I-S-K-E-Y, and whiskey from Scotland leaves out the E.
Exactly, yeah. So Irish whiskey can be recognised with an EY on the end. Irish whiskey is known generally as being triple distilled, very accessible, very smooth and easy to drink, and by not chill filtering our whiskies and using the different rum, for example the rum cask finish and the different aging techniques, we give lots of flavour along with that smoothness on top of the smoothness.
Now you are an independent brewery in Dublin, in Ireland, yeah. The distillery that actually and Irish invented whiskey, exactly. and it goes back hundreds of years.
Exactly. So the Teeling distillery originally was set up by Walter Teeling in 1792 in the Liberties in Dublin, which would have been the epicenter of whiskey in the world, and particularly Irish whiskey. We would have had about 40 different distilleries doing different styles of whiskey. So really for the Teeling whiskey family, this is just going back to the roots. This is the first new distillery in 125 years in Dublin. Unfortunately, there was a huge downturn, and this is whiskey coming back to its home, and what we're looking to revive the independent spirit of Dublin.
That's a fantastic angle. I absolutely love that. And it's hard to believe that the Irish were doing 90% of the whiskey trade only a couple of hundred years ago.
Exactly. And
now you're going, well, you're bringing that back home, aren't you?
Exactly, yeah. So if you look in 1870, we would have had so many different distilleries with different styles of whiskey, and fast forward 100 years to 1970, we had 3 distilleries with really on their knees. So we've had a huge kind of interest in our whiskey in reviving the independent Irish spirit in whiskey.
Now, if you're a fan of whiskey, if you're out there looking at it now and going, what are the differences between a Scottish whiskey and an Irish whiskey?
So a lot of Scottish whiskey can be known known as being a little bit sharper in flavour and smokier with the peated barley. Irish whiskey is generally known to be quite smooth, quite accessible. Our climate, with no real extremes in temperature, helps with the maturing process. It helps our whiskey be quite tasty and smooth, easy to drink.
It's fantastic. Last but not least, before we finish up, we've got the Potchin. Now that's just basically moonshine, isn't it?
Well, this is the original Irish spirit. When whiskey was invented in Ireland, this is what would have been distilled. The word Potchin comes from the word for pot still, which is what, it's a Gaelic word, what whiskey is made in a pot still. So this whiskey is straight off the still and into the bottle. It's not aged in cask, so it's new make whiskey. It's 61.5%. It's got quite a full flavour and a warm finish.
Well, Martin, it's a pleasure catching up with you.
Thank you very much.
We're going to stay down here at the bog. Remember, you can get these fantastic whiskies at Whiskey Galore. Martin, it's a pleasure catching up with you. Thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks, Nick.